Our guest is Terry Christensen. He's a registered physiotherapist, strength and conditioning specialist, and former clinical instructor. Hello, Terry. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Garmamie. I just wanted to thank you for this chance to be on this interview today. I've been working as a physio for a long time, but I think this is actually the first time anybody's asked to interview me. So thank you for the chance to talk with you and your viewers today. And hopefully we can discuss physio and some health-related topics, and we'll see where the conversation goes. So thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of the content you post on your Instagram. I find it very educational, and hence why I reached out and I wanted to speak to you about the topic of physiotherapy. Now, before we dive into it, give us a little bit background. What got you into physiotherapy and strength training? What led you into that direction and career path?
Yeah, if I go back, I was always a busy guy. I think as a kid, I was always into sports, nothing serious. I wasn't like, the best athlete, but always into playing sports and being active. I think when I was like 13 or 14, I saved money up from a paper route and bought my first weightlifting set, and was always kind of fascinated, I think, by physical culture in general. Then I finished high school. And I had a few years there where I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I think I went out west and did some tree planting, forest firefighting, and worked on fishing boats, and then came back to Ottawa. That was like 21, 22-ish, but no real direction. And the girlfriend I think I had at the time, or one of my friends, I can't remember who it was, had maybe convinced me to follow my passion that I had for exercise and that sort of stuff. And it's funny, related to your viewers, at that time I had signed up to do Taekwondo. So I was doing Taekwondo, nothing serious, but I ended up doing it at that point for a few years. So I was loose Taekwondo. I don't know if it's still there. It was at Bank in Gladstone way back in 1991 or 92.
Wow.
So I was like going to the gym, doing some Taekwondo, and I thought if I could translate that somehow into a career, it would be great. So I ended up studying kinesiology at University of Ottawa, and then I transferred and I went to Toronto for physiotherapy. So it was 6 years of total education in university. Graduated in 98, I guess, and I've been working ever since then. So I think it was a background, of just liking health and fitness and movement and trying to be able to help people that got me into it, and it still continues to be, what drives that fuel today is, my interest in sort of health, wellness, movement, and more importantly, trying to make that simple and help people, which is ultimately, as a physio, is probably one of the greatest things I'm grateful for.
Now, how would you describe the role of a physiotherapist in plain language? What do you do?
I think in the basic plain language is that we're kind of specialists in movement dysfunction. Now, movement dysfunction is a very broad category, and the scope of practice for physiotherapists is massive. Generally speaking, physio can be grouped into three domains. The cardio-rest domain, which is, the heart attacks, the cardiac rehab, people with asthma and COPD. That's a lot of, hospital-based physiotherapy. Then you have neurology, which is like the spinal cord injuries, the Parkinson's patients, the brain injuries. Again, usually hospital-based, but a lot more these days, as you'll see that in clinics. And then the bigger domain, which people seem to understand, is musculoskeletal. That's, the hip replacements, the knee replacements, the sore back, the sore knee, the injuries, the sports medicine. So those are the three primary areas of physio. And then there's all kinds of subcategories. You have physiotherapists who specialize, like I do, in sports medicine. You have physios who specialize in stroke rehabilitation. You have physios who work with kids with developmental disorders. You have physios who work with burn victims. So it allows you, once you finish schooling, to kind of pick the path that you want to go down. But I think what's probably that links all that together is physios, physical therapists, they call them in the US, physiotherapists around the world are looking at people's movement dysfunctions and figuring out ways how we can help people to get back to living a pain-free, independent life. So I think, movement specialists, probably the simplest way of describing physio.
Very interesting. Now, as I mentioned from the top, you produced a lot of great videos, highlighting a variety of stretches and exercise routines to improve people's mobility, flexibility, and overall health. two-part question here for you. The first part is, what sort of feedback and comments are you getting from people? And then I have a follow-up to that question.
Okay, well, thank you for the great words, the kind words. I'm glad you're watching them. You never know. Well, it's funny. Social media is funny. I mean, I'm a small partner in a clinic. I was the one who was voted to start doing social media, a year and a bit ago, reluctantly. I mean, I'm not young. I didn't grow up with social media, so trying to start Instagram and TikTok and whatnot was a little overwhelming. And of course, at the beginning, I overthought it and I had to make it perfect and evidence-based. And, because in my mind, I was trying to impress the other physios, et cetera, which nobody cares. Once I kind of overcame that, the self-consciousness piece of it, I was able to start getting in a routine of doing it. The feedback's been good. It's been like a year and a bit of doing it. I went from 0 followers to on Instagram, 5,500 followers, which
wow,
nothing. There's nothing in the social media world, but the fact that if that many people are watching stuff, then hey, that's fantastic. So the primary reason I do it is not for business or to drum up business. I mean, that has no bearing on what I'm doing in the clinic. It was basically to, like you said, if I can show people what's worked for me and my patients, and then that's helpful for them, it's been great. So the feedback is intermittent. You don't get a lot of engagement back. I do get some, but I get people thanking me from all over the world, which is fantastic. So I've gotten, thank yous, doesn't happen all the time, but it's nice to hear, oh, that stretch helped me, or, thank you for doing this, or I appreciate what you're doing. So it's neat that I've also been able to connect with, people from all over the world, other clinicians and just other people and stuff too. So, you probably do online stuff. So it's all new to me. It's nice to be part of something bigger, I guess, than myself sometimes. It's very easy to let it take up too much of my time too. So I have to balance doing that. But the primary reason that I want to do it and continue to do it is just to be able to help people, because not everybody has the chance that they can go to a physiotherapy. If you don't have coverage or don't have insurance, can add up and get expensive. And unfortunately, it's not accessible to a lot of people. And I really believe that physiotherapy and rehabilitation doesn't have to be that complicated. It really is quite simple. Most people can manage most things on their own if they're given the right information. And so I want to, cut through a lot of the myths that are out there, a lot of, the false narratives that have been, cast aside and people have moved on. But there's a lot of fear mongering that can happen within healthcare. And there's a lot of people, when they're in pain, they don't know, right? So they want to go see somebody, and then someone says, well, now you got to come see me 3 times a week for 6 weeks, and thousands of dollars later, maybe they're good, maybe they're not. I don't know. So basically, it was just to help people, and to share what I've learned and what's worked for me. And so far, the feedback has been mostly positive.
I bet. No, it's great. It's great content, and making it accessible to the public is really I think empowering and important, because if anyone's ever stretched pulled a muscle or has had an injury, we go online, we look for that information, and I find with a lot of the content that you're putting online, obviously it's practical, it's educational, as I mentioned, and you're connecting with people from locally and globally, right? You've received,
which is kind of cool.
It is, yeah. And I wanted to know a follow up to that question for you. How has, in terms of that engagement, how has it informed your practice? What has it done for you in terms of understanding physio at a different level? Has it impacted your approach?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because it's very easy when you start to do these things to, let your ego get in the way or something, or try to do some cool move that maybe I think is good. But it's reminded me what people need the most and are looking for the most is the basic advice. What happens if I pull a muscle? What happens if I sprain my ankle? These things to me seem simple, so I can overcomplicate in my mind what I want to write about or what I want to do, and realizing that and being reminded people just need the basic information. It's like learning a new language. You need to learn the letters first. You need to have how to spell cat, how to spell dog, how to put that together into a sentence. And I think, pain and pain science and rehab is the same way. I think most people, what most people need are the basics. And now, unfortunately, I think within social media and the fitness culture, the gym culture, the rehab culture, we're all talking to each other, right? It's if you look across the population of how many people are working out and going to the gym or living that quote unquote active life, it's probably like 10 to 15% of the population, right? Most of the people that I see that come to the clinic aren't necessarily the gym goers, the active athletes. They're everybody, people trying to, manage their life. They got busy jobs, families, commitments, stressors. Maybe they exercise, maybe they don't, maybe they think they should, maybe they don't, but, life gets in the way sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and if we can make that simple, and I'm really big in trying to reduce the barriers to just getting people to maybe become more active again, maybe become a little bit more self-sufficient, because most of the chronic health conditions we see, most of the injuries, most of the repetitive strains are just the result of, maybe we haven't taken care of ourselves over time. Not through being lazy, but it's easy to, put yourself at the bottom of the list. It's easy to not prioritize your own health and movement when you're raising kids, raising a family, have a job.
Right.
And really, what I see, a lot of it can be prevented with some basic information done for a minimum amount of time. So I think I'm a big fan in my own life. I've got 7-year-old twins. I'm a husband. I'm part of a practice. I don't have time to go to the gym an hour and a half every day. I don't have time to live that life. So I'm always constantly trying to figure out what's the quickest, most time efficient way to take care of myself.
Right.
And that's the same thing applies to everybody else. So hopefully, as I continue down this journey, maybe my message gets a bit simpler and I can present it in a better way. But, the overarching theme I would like to do with my practice and with social media is just, one, reduce the barriers to access information and to simplify it and maybe be a bit of a filter, because, I'm not an accountant. If I go look at what's the best way to invest money, I'm going to be overwhelmed. Right. And people do that when it comes to health, to fitness, to losing weight, to getting strong. They go to Google, they go to magazines. There's so many conflicting articles, information. You don't know what to do.
Right.
I know how to separate all that out, and I know how to get rid of it and sift through it. So if I can help people to filter that information and say, no, you just need to do these things, because the basic science on, the stages of inflammation, how tissue repairs itself hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. The fundamental principles to strength and conditioning, to exercise, to fitness, to health, nothing's changed. There's nothing new. But everybody's trying to rebrand it and repackage it and resell something. It's all sell.
Sure.
I don't want to sell. I just want to empower people and hopefully help them to be able to be the best versions of themselves without having to spend a whole bunch of money. So hopefully I can continue doing that if I'm lucky anyway.
Man, it's what you said there is really powerful. That is self-empowerment piece and making this information accessible from a subject matter expert. And you are that person, as I mentioned from the top. You're a registered physiotherapist. You have over 20 years of experience. And I think you kind of answered this question here, but I'll ask you directly. What's your approach and philosophy to physiotherapy and strength?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and it's an important question, because you go see 10 physios, 10 chiros, 10 massage therapists, you're going to get, why does my back hurt? And you're going to get 10 different answers. I've been working for 24 years now plus on the front lines. I don't know how much of an expert I am, but I've been treating people day in and day out for 24 years. I've seen literally thousands and thousands of people. I also try to do my best to be evidence informed, because the science around pain, around tissue healing, around injuries, it is changing. Some of the narratives that we used to use before have been sort of dismissed now or proven wrong. And we're moving into a new age of really trying to not get too hung up on what we used to refer to as the biomedical approach to pain and rehab. Like if you came in with a sore shoulder, in the past, I might say, well, just because your posture is bad, you're not breathing properly, one shoulder blade is sitting back, your head is forward. It would come up with all these reasons. You come in with one problem and you're leaving with 10,
right.
And don't worry, Garmamie, I'm going to be the guy to fix you, and you need to come see me 3 times a week because I have this special knowledge. Now, what we realized from the totality of the evidence out there is there's a lot of people with bad posture who have no pain. There's a lot of people who are in pain and have great findings on their MRIs and on their X-rays and on their images. And there's some people who are performing at a very high level. If you had body scans on them, you'd see all kinds of problems, and you wonder how they're even moving. So how do you reconcile all that? It's difficult, but I think the biggest thing is just trust in the body's ability to heal itself. Give people back what we refer to as the locus of control for their own healing. We're wonderfully asymmetrical. We have the capacity to heal. We just need to, apply the proper principles with some guidance, and miracles can happen every day. I see it every day. And it's not because of any special thing I'm doing. It oftentimes has to be just pointing somebody in the right direction, and then maybe progressing things as we need to do it. Not that there's not it's not a place for some of the hands-on treatment and some of those modalities, but that creates dependency. I'd rather create independency when it comes to helping people get better. So I think trying to make it simple, cut through the myths, helping you to be responsible for your own recovery, and how can I help you to do that? So I think that's fundamentally what drives a lot of my clinical practice now.
Interesting. I have some questions for you that are kind of more general for the everyday person. Like, for people who sit for long periods of time, like office workers and so on. Like we keep hearing that sitting for extended periods of time is terrible for the body and so on. Yeah, my question, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on this. Generally, what happens to the body when we're sitting for long periods of time, working, whatever, etc. What should people, what should they be considering to address and avoid, like, the physical risk that could be caused by sitting for extended periods of time? Because and I ask that for personal reasons. Like I sit for long periods of time, and holy moly, over the last couple of years in particular, it's just been, it hasn't been all that healthy. And I'm just curious, from in your opinion, what happens when people sit for extended periods of time? How does it impact their health?
Well, it would be like doing anything for any period of time. If I just lie down for all 8 hours a day, that would probably have an effect too. I think because people have to go to work and sit in chairs, sitting definitely has been demonized lately. Sitting is the new smoking. You hear all these things, and that's a bit, polarizing. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think maintaining any one position for any length of time is probably not beneficial for us. What we say now is, your best posture is your next one. So the body likes movement variability. When we stop, what I see as a physio, and what I think can be generally, summed up, is that we as humans have a normal movement repertoire. We should be able to turn our head. We should be able to look up. We should be able to lift our arms over our shoulders. We should be able to extend our hips. So, I think as our human rights, we should have this, this movement repertoire. We should be able to access and do the fundamental human movements of pushing, pulling, squatting, hip hinging, rolling around, all these things that, as kids and as babies we're able to do. But then, we sit in school, and then we sit in our jobs. And then over time, like if I never lift my hand over my head, then I got to paint my kitchen ceiling, I'm going to get a sore shoulder. And same way, when sitting, what tends to happen with sitting, we end up, we can slouch forward, our hip flexors can get tight sometimes. We can get so-called what people refer to as muscle imbalances, which are, it can happen. I don't like necessarily use the language around a lot of stuff, but I think what can happen if we're sitting all the time, we end up going from this position of where we're kind of carrying ourselves well to become slumped over, right? And then we spend, 8 hours a day like this.
Yes.
It's going to be difficult to get us back upright again, too.
Right.
It's almost like an evolutionary picture where you see, the caveman walking, he slowly comes up. We've gotten back down to these positions, too. So in general, these sitting positions just pull us all in. Our hip flexors get tight. These muscles here in our chest get tight. our lats, these muscles in our back that even though they come from our back, they come up around to the front. Everything ends up pulling us in here. Our head gets cranked down. So then if we never address it, we never do the opposite, which is, getting the shoulder blades back, getting our head back, bringing our arms up, lifting our arms up over our head. If we never do these things, when we need to do them, we get injured or we just lose our ability to access these movements. So as a physio, I see this a lot. Someone comes in, I've got neck pain, and they haven't been exercising or moving. They've been sitting hunched over a desk for the last 20 years. We start to work on stuff and they get mad that they're not better in 3 appointments. But I think what we do see over time is a lot of imbalances between all of the muscles, what we refer to the posterior chain. It's our glutes, our back muscles, our hamstrings, with some of these muscles in the front that tend to want to pull us down too. So it's almost like our anti-gravity muscles need more work. We need to, work on getting our head back, getting our shoulder blades back, engaging the muscles, in our butt and our legs that kind of propel us and move us forward. So a lot of times I'm just trying to get people to move in the opposite direction that they're not. We see that if someone has been sitting the whole time, or we see that with certain sports they're doing. If we're doing too much of one side, it's like a teeter-totter. We need to balance both sides. And I find that with movement a lot, movement restrictions, that's, we need to, in general, loosen up the things that have gotten too tight, maybe wake up the muscles that haven't worked, and that could, that's a general template. I think I end up working with a lot of people, but yeah, you're right. When we sit all the time, there's going to be some common imbalances that typically happen with that.
Right.
Hopefully I've answered and haven't gone off too much of a tangent there.
No, it's great. I think you were talking about the theme of balance overall with our bodies. And I was curious to know, in terms of strength training for the everyday person, not so much the athlete or the quote unquote high performance athlete, just the everyday person. 3-part question. What are the benefits of strength training, and what parts of the body should people be prioritizing? And should one consider like a particular program? I know these are big questions. I don't know how do you want to approach them.
They're not big questions, and these are probably the most important questions you're asking, because hopefully in answering these questions, I can simplify a lot of things, because the questions you ask basically are what drives my clinical practice. So in general, the benefits of strength training, increase independence, increase mobility, increased tissue capacity. If we look at the literature, one of the biggest predictors of living a long and healthy life isn't a certain blood test you can do. It's not some special measurement you can do. It's the people who maintain their strength and who maintain their muscle mass as they get older are the ones who live longer and have less chronic disease. Now, there's something we refer to as sarcopenia, which is just the age-related loss of muscle with time.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that word one more time?
The word, it's called sarcopenia.
Okay.
That's just a fancy word for saying we lose our muscle over time.
Okay.
So what happens as we start to age, if we don't do anything, we're going to lose 5 to 7%, somewhere around there, of our muscle mass per decade, starting even into our 30s and 40s. And then as we hit our 50s, 60s, and 70s, that can climb up to almost 10 or 15%. So imagine if you didn't do anything from the time you were 30 to the time you were 70, you're going to have the same skeleton, but you're going to have a lot less muscle mass, which is going to translate to a lot less strength. Now, with that loss of muscle mass, you have loss of strength, loss of ability to move your body, loss of blood sugar regulation, loss of immune function. So maintaining our muscle mass is probably, and I don't mean you have to be a bodybuilder, I just mean you have to not lose it. Maintaining our muscle mass and strength is probably one of the lowest hanging fruits we can do to maintain our physical health. Obviously, our cardiovascular system is up there too. They're probably those two things are easy things that we can do. And a lot of that translates into just increasing our physical activity. And again, we just have a lot of barriers to being able to do that. So the more barriers we have to those things, because we're told we can't do this or we can't do that, the more difficult it becomes to getting people moving again too. So, I'm a big fan of just getting people moving. And my bias, being a strength and conditioning specialist, is to get people doing some kind of resistance training. Because that, that as I've seen in my clinical practice and from what I read and stuff, if we can maintain our strength and our muscle mass throughout our life, we'll have a better health span and a better lifespan. So rather than just living, to 80 or 90 years old because our lifespans are getting longer, I don't want the last 15 years to be, medicated, dependent on mobility aids. I can't get to my own groceries. And unfortunately, that's what we see. We have a lot of people that are old, but old and sick. I'd rather maintain my independence and, be healthy to the time, that's time for me to, to drop dead. And it doesn't have to be complicated. That's where a lot of the problems I see are. So, I guess to answer your question, yes, I think strength training is important. And that can be done for as little as, an hour a week, divided into a few different sessions. So I guess to answer your questions and to simplify, the way I scale it down is we need to do the basic fundamental human movements. So the basic fundamental human movements, the way that I see it, and some of, the best coaches in history have sort of framed this, are we need to work on pushing exercises, pulling exercises, that could be in a horizontal plane, pushing exercises, pulling exercises. So when I say pushing and pulling, what I'm talking about is movement patterns, not specific exercises. So if I'm saying we need to work on pushing Garmamie, that could be it could be a push up on a wall as an easy version. It could be a push up on a kitchen counter. It could be some dumbbells and doing like a bench press. It could be pressing some weight overhead. Those are all examples of pushing movements. Pulling movements could be, a hard one would be doing like a pull up or a chin up, or it could be doing rows with some weights. It could be doing like a pull down machine, some cables. So once we understand the movement templates that we have, then we just have to plug an exercise in there. So the fundamental movements are pushing, pulling, and for lower body or some kind of squatting, and then some kind of hip hinge movement too. So squatting, I don't know if you can see me on that there, squatting is, just squatting down, right? So we could be doing movements where I'm kind of squatting down, which we tend to lose over time, or a hip hinge movement, which some people don't understand necessarily. It would be movements where we're just kind of moving our body here. So that could be like a deadlift type of a movement, kettlebell swing, you name it. So in general, what people need to do is work on pushing, pulling, squatting, and hinging. And they need to do that with appropriate load and intensity for the appropriate amount of sets or reps. And if we're going to simplify it, I would say, pick 4 exercises, 1 pushing exercise, 1 pulling exercise, 1 hip hinge exercise, 1 squatting exercise. Find the movement that challenges you. So you have to pick the right variation for yourself. And do that for a set of 8. So if you have 4 exercises, push, pull, squat, hinge, you could do each one of those for 3 sets of 8. When you get to 3 sets of 12, then you can make it harder or pick a different exercise. So it kind of goes back to teaching the person to fish rather than give them a fish.
Right.
If we have a simple template, and that's what I try to teach any of the clients that I have or patients that I have, is that if we have this basic template, that will carry us through the rest of our life. And then all we have to do is, I'm going to exercise today. Am I going to push? I'm going to pull. I'm going to do some kind of squat or some kind of hip hinge. And then if I have all the ones I can plug into there, that's kind of the nucleus of what we need to do. If we have more time, we can expand out and do my bicep curls, my tricep exercises, and my vanity moves. But if we do those basic movements with an adequate intensity, so it has to be done with, we have to push ourselves. If I say I want you to, do a set of 8, that doesn't mean you did a set of 8 repetitions, but you could have done 12. We only get better when we push against our capacity a little bit, because that creates the adaptation we need to get stronger. But we need to do that in a safe way too. So, and the good news is, I think on my Instagram, I went through all these movements. I went through pushing, pulling, squatting, hinging. I think on my Instagram page I did this at January. It was like a 3-minute video of strength training for beginners. And it was how to, I went through each category: pushing, pulling, squatting, hinging, and I gave 5 or 6 examples of different exercises for those categories. So a very simple template would pick one, pick one, pick one, pick one. These are the ones that challenge me, do those. I mean, that's an easy template to get started, and that's pretty consistent with, what a lot of the researchers said, what, the Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology says, what the Academy of Physicians for Sports Medicine says, what the National Strength and Conditioning, all these big agencies that develop guidelines, where everybody's saying the same thing. Do big movements, do them with enough sets and reps, and do it consistently over time. And it doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be expensive, and it can be very accessible to anybody.
Very interesting. Now, I do have some questions that are more geared towards like athletes,
For sure.
Recreational athletes and professional athletes and elite level competitors. But before we transition to that, I just wanted, I have a follow up in regards to what you said there. From your point of view and your experience, and from what you've seen, what in terms of people's physical literacy on movement and health and physical health, and when it comes to exercise and strength and so on, where do you think the average person from the people you've seen, do they have a lot of knowledge when they come to you seeking treatment? Or I guess the question should be, sorry, I'm formulating the question as we're talking. I'm just curious to know, like, what are your thoughts on people's level of knowledge when it comes to physical health and strength training?
I unfortunately, I wish it was a lot better. I think people have been bombarded with the media and with different approaches that it's hard to know or understand what they need to do. To me, it seems quite simple. If you can't, squat down and do a deep squat, let's get you better at that. That's going to improve so many other things, but our people just aren't aware of how much movement capacity they've lost over time. And that has to do with, we just stop doing it. If you look at kids move, look at the movements they can get into. Try an exercise where you watch your 4-year-old play and try to do everything he's doing. It's an interesting exercise when you. I can't keep up. That's what I mean, right? So why have we lost that? Because we just stopped doing it. Right. We stopped doing different positions. We stopped, sitting on the floor and getting back up. We stopped rolling around. We stopped, going into these deep squat positions, and then over time, because we, it's kind of use it or lose it, right? But, we lose it because we don't use it. The body's, if we get out of the way, the body's pretty good at taking care of itself. But unfortunately, we just get stuck in inefficient patterns because we've stopped moving our body the way evolution designed us to do. And that's a whole nother conversation of, were we designed to be sitting in cubicles and desks for 8 hours a day and eating overprocessed food and everything else, right? So, we're products of our environment. And if you look at, things like the blue zones, where there are these high percentages of people around the world who live beyond the age of 100, like what separates them out? Now, of course, there's a lot of different variables, but movement is a big one of them, right? And a lot of these people are fishermen or agriculture or farmers. So maintaining movement was the big component of their health and longevity. And that wasn't even doing regimented exercise. It was they just continued to move their body in the way that it was. I mean, there's some very healthy people in the world that never exercise. You know what I mean? They've just maintained their body. They've moved. And they keep doing it. I think we're beautifully designed organisms that that need movement as an input. And unfortunately, a lot of people, don't appreciate or understand, or there's a lot of barriers into being able to do that. And then, so, a lot of people, when they come to see me, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of misinformation. And that's perpetuated by, within the profession, within, seeing doctors, within seeing other clinicians and stuff, because it can get so confusing for people. Mm-hmm. So hopefully, like I said before, I just try to simplify it and get people moving in the basic movement patterns. And then most times when we start to do that, things will improve.
Now, Terry, I'm going to move on to ask questions that are more specific to sports and combat sports
Absolutely.
athletes. The first one here is you've worked with all sorts of athletes at all levels, from recreationalists to professionals and Olympians. I want to focus on professional and Olympians. How receptive are they to physiotherapy, and does the treatment approach differ when you're dealing with these high performance athletes vis-a-vis just the regular person?
Um, the principles don't change. I think what changes is that when you have people who are performing at a high level and their livelihood depends on it, they're going to be a lot more proactive, or a lot keen to address and deal with any kind of problems that are going to come up. You know, you and I get a sore back, you know, we're too busy, we're going to ignore it, it's going to go away on its own. You know, however, you know, regardless if you're a combat sport athlete, if you're a football player, it really doesn't matter. When people, I find in general that most people who are performing at a high level, either at the amateur level, professional level, take their physical health pretty seriously, and are pretty proactive. And it's nice to deal with these people a lot of times too, because they're so engaged in the process of getting better. Because they want to get back out there, and that's not even professional,
Right.
but any kind of a lot of people who are quite athletic, but definitely with professional athletes, if their livelihood is dependent on it, and are dependent on either recovering from an injury, or just not getting injured in the first place, they'll be a bit more proactive and maybe a bit more compliant with maybe coming in for treatment or following through with the treatment program that needs to be done. I think general principles still apply. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. If you sprain your ankle, you sprain your ankle.
Mm-hmm.
The same initial principle. It's going to get hot. It's going to get swollen. You're going to be limping. Now, with professional athletes, Olympic athletes, the end goal becomes different. So that bridge between rehabilitation and performance changes. Where someone sprains their ankle, they just have to be able to walk again and maybe go for a jog. Whereas as an athlete, you might see them for a bit longer because their need and their capacity is that much more. So there's a lot of transition between rehabilitation and into performance. Now, as a physio, I see most people at the entry level side. I'm not necessarily following them through until their game, their event, their fight, whatever that's going to be.
Right.
There have been some situations where it's been nice. I've been able to work with the athlete, with their strength and conditioning team, with their trainer. We're all trying to work together, to get to that podium, that performance, that place, and stuff like that too. So it's fun in the sense that usually they're able to participate, because they have the time or the resources in their therapy, so we can work together longer.
Mm-hmm.
And we can get to do some higher level things because their need to perform requires maybe some higher level exercises, beyond your traditional rehabilitation stuff. So, I think the principles are still the same. The end goal and what they need is just a little bit different. So maybe we have to build in a bit more strength, resiliency, power, so that they don't get hurt or injured again. But yeah, it's all fun. But I think the principles are the same. But I
Right.
think, yeah, it's just getting them to that. It's a different place they need to get to.
Right. Now, just to follow up, without mentioning names, can you tell us a story about how physical therapy treatment transformed or augmented a high performance athlete's performance?
Yeah, I don't know that anything I do transformed anybody, but I would like to think that I had a bigger impact on that, and that I was that good. I like to take responsibility, but I'm just here to support anybody that comes to see me.
Right.
I'm in the background. Nothing that anybody achieves is because anything I did. I'm just trying to. I'm the support staff, and hopefully, I can give you a couple of examples. I mean, I've worked, I guess, related to your audience. I had someone came to see me years ago. He was, I guess, the light heavyweight Muay Thai champ of the world at one point.
Okay.
With a foot and ankle injury, and he had a fight coming up within 6 months, I believe. And he just happened. Our paths just happened to cross. I don't know. It was just by luck and by chance. That kind of introduced me. So that was quite a while ago into the. I think at that point there was just a Muay Thai organization forming across Canada. Like, it was like an amateur fight scene that was still starting.
Okay.
He was on the professional level, but it was right around this time that he was helping to, or his people were helping to launch this organization, I think. But he was able to, I think, hopefully with some of the rehabilitation, get back to his training quicker than he otherwise would have. And then back, and I never saw him, so I don't know. I think he had a fight coming up 3 months after I saw, and he never came back to my table, so or to my clinic. So hopefully, the rehabilitation that we did was able to get him back to training a little quicker. And I think sometimes the physio with some of these athletes, it allows them to get back to doing what they need to do, maybe a little bit faster sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I had a few people in the CFL who've been able to return to training camps. Or I had one guy actually he came to see me in the off season, a bunch of injuries. We followed some basic, strength and conditioning principles and some rehab principles. They went back to a training camp in the fall and got picked up again for another season. So I like to think that, working with some of these people, maybe we were able to check a few boxes and deal with some of those reoccurring aches and pains that were the result of some sort of movement dysfunction or muscle imbalance that had happened as a product of their training over time. And that's what we see with a lot of athletes. You keep hitting against the wall until you can't do it anymore. And then you might have to dig a bit deeper, go under the hood a little bit more to, to see how certain muscle firing patterns are going, to check maybe some of their joint mechanics, to look at any kind of restrictions that may be there, because our body is really good at adapting to restrictions it may have until it can't.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's that, until it can't, and then we'll, oftentimes break down, and then just put another Band-Aid on it won't work. So sometimes we have to dig a bit deeper and address, some of those underlying problems of why some of these reoccurring injuries are happening in the first place. So hopefully through that, physio rehab process, we were able to take care of some of that and get people to back to playing or performing in an injury-free way, maybe quicker than if they had just ignored it. So hopefully, I've seen lots of people over time. Hopefully has helped.
Well, it's I just want to go back to what you said before you answered it in terms of support staff. I think you guys, be it the therapist as well as the coaches, of course, play a huge integral part in the athletes, overall quality of life and physical health. Obviously, you know what I mean. I think for recreationals and high performance athletes, you always hear about the aspects of their support staff team, and for the most part, of course, it includes a physiotherapist and how they aided them, assisted them in recovering from that injury and improving their entire physical performance. That's why I asked that, and I think there's probably we don't see a lot of just as an aside, real quick. A lot of the times with sports content, I'll generalize here because I tend to focus more on combat sports. We don't get to hear much from physical therapists. You know what I mean? You hear about the coaches sometimes, but you hear from the coaches, but you don't hear much from the physiotherapist. And I think there's a whole, slew of stories and perspectives that you can get on the athletes just from speaking to the physical therapist. This is, I'm no expert. I'm as someone who's interested in story when it comes to sports, combat sports in particular. I'm pretty sure physiotherapists have that insights, because they're dealing with the athlete directly. They're healing them, they're training them. And I'm sure there's a lot of that in that exchange and that rapport.
Yeah, well, when people come in, it's not like we don't follow them for a long time, but the time we do spend together is pretty intensive and pretty personal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I love about being a physio is that someone comes in and you're engaging with somebody, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week for an hour or more at a time. So you're really usually getting to know the person. You're getting to understand them, just like if you would spend that time with anybody. So
right.
I think, as therapists and clinicians, we do, I'm grateful and I feel very, I feel privileged to be able to hold the hand of people as they're trying to get better, be it professional athletes or be it grandma or be it anybody, is right. That it's a very unique experience that we get to engage with someone on a personal level like that as we're trying to work together to come up with solutions to their problems. And I think physiotherapy as a profession, we have a unique knowledge base that can help almost everybody. And I
Mm-hmm.
wish that almost everybody, just like you have your family doctor, had their family physiotherapist, because
Right.
there's a lot of things that I see, with everybody, with kids, with adults, that with some basic advice can be taken care of. You hurt your shoulder, you hurt your back, and then now you got to
Yeah.
go see my doctor. Now I have to get an image. Now I have to do all this because you don't know, and by the time that maybe somebody gets to me, be it the athlete or be it grandma, they hurt their knee or they hurt their ankle, but they didn't know what to do. So, they tried to look it up. It didn't get better. They had to try to get to see a doctor, or try to get to see a specialist. They've been given some medication. They've been sent for x-rays or ultrasounds or MRIs. Meanwhile, they're in pain the whole time. Maybe that process has taken 3 months. Nothing's improved. They finally, through no fault of their own, someone says, go see a physio, and they come in to see us, and with some very basic advice, not because I'm doing anything special, but I'm able to intervene and reassure them and say, oh, yeah, but we see this all the time. We just need to do this, this, and this, and within a few weeks, or sometimes as little as a few appointments, they're dramatically better.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick
Yeah,
and say I've experienced that, man, and especially
it's crazy.
for my back. It's like I'm in a lot of pain because of my back, and then all of a sudden, I go in and I see a therapist, and and I'm led through the process, and you see the improvement, and you're like extremely grateful for it because you're no longer in pain, and you can, what I mean? And
Yeah,
your quality of life has returned, and that mobility, which I'll be honest, like, maybe some of us take that for granted sometimes. We don't realize, like it's not until you get injured, if it's something, like a small back injury, but that still restricts your mobility. You're like, oh wow, this is, this is pretty serious because I
yeah.
can't walk or run or jump or do what I could do. I know I'm stating the obvious here, but there's a whole lot of gratitude towards the work of people like yourselves in healing people and addressing their issues. Because I think for me personally, I'll just say this, that traditionally what I would do before is just go see a massage therapist. And
Yeah.
massage therapists do important, great work, not knocking them at all. But I think there's a lot more to gain from depending on the case, maybe by seeing a physiotherapist. But I just want to jump back to this line of question regarding athletes,
Yeah, yeah.
particularly combat sports athletes. What are some of the common injuries you've assisted with when it comes to combat sports athletes? Whether it's striking based or grappling based combat sports or both, what do you see as common recurring injuries for these
Yeah,
athletes?
well, it's a great question, and I've seen a lot of people who are into combat sports over the years. A lot of the injuries have been from the people that I've seen have been usually grappling injuries, dislocated shoulder, dislocated knee, ACL tear. That more or less usually, comes from getting into these joint holes and these positions sometimes and going down. So, I haven't seen as much on the striking side of things, a few fractured hands, maybe concussions that people get sometimes. I've definitely, in my experience anyway, and that's just only my experience, I've seen lots of grappling injuries over the years,
Mm-hmm.
most to do with, I would say, torn ACLs, dislocated shoulders, dislocated collarbones,
Yikes.
a couple of broken wrists. Those are kind of the ones that sort of come to mind when I think about combat sport related injuries. Some ankle
Mm-hmm.
sprains, people going around and going over on their ankles and stuff. But I would say from the combat sports, it's a lot of these joint ligament injuries of people getting into these compromised positions, who usually make it into to see me, and I've seen a lot of people who've had to get surgery because of their injuries related to, their participation in combat sports. That's not to say that everybody who does it gets injured, but the ones that I see tend to be the more serious injuries,
Right.
where they've been forced to, most people who are participating in combat sports are pretty fit people to begin with, and it's going to take a lot for them to, come in to see me. They get a little ache or pain or sore back, they're not coming in. The people I see are okay. I can't kick right now, so I'm gonna have to fix this.
Right. Right.
you know.
Now, I just want to, I have a follow up to that. But before I do, I'm going to set it up by putting in context that, injuries do occur in sports, whether it's recreationalists, slash weekend warriors or professional and elite level amateur athletes. There are many factors that can augment the probability of injury, whether playing sports or not. Now, some people tend to push through the pain or overtrain or simply not listen to their bodies. Now, where am I going with this? The question is, from what you've observed, are injuries generally preventable? And if so, how much does the role of listening to one's body play while training, exercising, and engaging in sports?
Good question. I think, I think a lot of injuries, most injuries, I think, are too much too soon. Sometimes, I mean, there's going to be the odd, there's some injuries that are completely unpreventable. It's the accident, you tripped, you fell, you got hit. Certain injuries are completely unpreventable because it's just bad luck. Now, that said, there are a lot of injuries that we see, or that I see, is because, too much too soon, or your body just wasn't ready for that. I guess a good way of describing that would be, someone's, hasn't done anything with their health. They decide, I'm going to get back in shape and they're going to go start running. I'm going to start running because jogging is the best thing I need to do. They're convinced that, that's the way I'm going to lose weight and feel better. Now, if you think about running, every time you run or even just or jogging, that's about, anywhere from, 4 to 8 times your body weight going through each leg. Now, if I get a lot of people coming in and I get them to stand on one leg and try to do a one-legged squat or half a squat, they can't even do that. They're all over their place. They don't have the balance and they definitely don't have the strength. And if I ask them to do that a few times, they don't have the capacity to do that. But now do that 10,000 times because you decided to go for a 5K run or something. So a lot of what has to happen with our bodies is we need to be a bit more cognizant on the mechanical stress that's happening, because we can feel, like our cardiovascular system's in shape, but, I start leaping and jumping around and I haven't done anything for years. That's a lot of mechanical load on our tendons, our ligaments, our connective tissues, our joints. And if we go from nothing to half an hour, that's a big load spike. So it's suddenly we went, we've increased the load on our structures by 1,000%. So rather than, I'm going to get back in shape and I'm going to do some sort of boot camp class or go for a run and I'm doing something for half an hour, let's do maybe 10 minutes, 4 or 5 times a week rather than 45 minutes twice a week. So I think listening to your body, number one, if you're starting to, have some pain that's probably more than like a 3 or 4 out of 10, you have to back things off. And I think more importantly is just to being aware of, especially as we get older, and unfortunately that's me, as we engage in new activities, sports, new hobbies, and that could be a simple thing as, running around with your kids playing soccer. How many people I've seen who decided they're going to go play soccer with their kids and they tear their Achilles tendon.
Yikes.
And that's because, it's the 45-year-old dad who wants to go play with his kids, but hasn't really done anything for a while and definitely hasn't sprinted. And suddenly they sprint a few times and they pop their Achilles. And I didn't realize, right? So it's unfortunately, as the older we get, the more time we might take to, recalibrate things. But the body is incredibly adaptable if we give it the right chance to do it. And we think about quantifying that mechanical stress and dosing it in an appropriate way. We do a little bit, that feels good. We do a little bit more, that feels good. We do a little bit more. It's, and that way we're going to usually avoid injuries. And if you have questions, talk to somebody, go see a physio or a coach or something. If you're not sure about what you want to get back into. But what I see with a lot of people is, I guess, if they had, better awareness around returning to activities or doing sports, we could probably avoid a lot of injuries if we maybe dose that appropriately. Or again, this comes back to, strength and conditioning. I think if we spend a bit more time building that foundation, with our joint mobility, with some of our flexibility and our strength, then it allows us to do all these other things. Like I firmly believe that, strength is the glass that everything else will fit into. If we're a bit, we're never going to go wrong by getting stronger usually, and what I see with with a lot of people as they're, returning to sport or re-engaging and stuff is that they just don't have the mobility or the strength. It's not as optimal, let's say, as it could be to engage in those activities because we just haven't addressed it for a long time.
That's a really important message that you're sharing, especially now because as we're in the middle of this pandemic. Well, not the middle, hopefully the end. Who knows? I don't know. But a lot of more people are doing things right, and people are getting back to their previous physical activities, and hopefully they're not getting injured in the process. But in terms, sorry.
So you know what? I think it kind of comes back down to basic physical literacy and physical education, and that even goes back down to if we think about it as kids. If you look at back in the 20s and 30s, physical education was gymnastics, rings, jumping, tumbling,
right?
Learning how to squat, learning how to do push-ups, learning how to move your body in space. But then at one point in the 50s or 60s, we replaced physical education and physical literacy with games and sports. So then gym class just became about sports, about playing soccer, playing volleyball, but nobody told us about all these other things that we forgot about. Now, flash forward, now we're going through our schooling system, and maybe, a group of the kids liked the sports, they did well, but there was a whole population of people that didn't engage in the sports, didn't want to do the sports, but also weren't given that physical education. Then we go into our adulthood, and we're still have lost, that knowledge, or we've lost that knowledge that I think we should have, that hopefully would have prevented us from getting into some of these problems in the first place.
Very interesting historical context there as far as, the history of physical training. But I'm curious to know, in terms of recurring injuries, like, they can linger for years, be it back
absolutely,
pain.
For sure.
Yeah, be it back pain, shoulder pain, whatever. What is the body trying to tell us when we keep getting these reoccurring injuries? Well, what's the universe trying to tell us?
What's the universe trying to tell us? Go see a physiotherapist.
That's an excellent ad right there. That's awesome.
Tell us. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of these reoccurring, and I trust me, that's what I see all the time. My back pain. There it goes again. I've had this, 6 times in the last 10 years. Wow. I don't know what it's trying to tell us sometimes. And it's funny because pain, this gets into the whole neuroscience of pain, is that pain doesn't always just equal tissue damage. Sometimes we can have pain, especially in our back or neck pain or something, that isn't always correlated to tissue damage. It can be sometimes these certain pathways that they get reinforced. It's almost like, these ruts on a dirt road. Sometimes we have to change the pathway. So sometimes we have to change how we do things. We have to change our mindset around these injuries, change how we approach how we're doing things. I think if we're having, repetitive same types of injuries, then it has to probably, having a proper assessment as to why that keeps happening. And a lot of times, that can be for some chronic tendinopathy that someone's developed over time, or possibly some inefficient movement patterns that have developed over time that hopefully can be addressed, with, a proper plan of care. And, and to simplify things, it's usually, loosening up the things that are too tight, and that could be with some stretching, mobility work. Sometimes, we do some hands-on work and some joint manipulations and mobilizations, acupuncture. There's all kinds of modalities we can use to, to change the input, as we refer to as neuromodulation, change that input into our brain and our nervous system, loosen up some of these muscles that are hopefully tight, or help the body to find ways to find better strategies so that their body isn't in this increased tone. And then maybe, help to reorganize some of those movement patterns in a more efficient way so we don't get injured in the future. So usually, it usually comes down to sort of calming some stuff down and then rebuilding it back up again. And I think if it's reoccurring, it's if something keeps reoccurring, I think, the universe is probably telling us that, maybe it's time to get some input and to see if I can get this fixed. And hopefully you come across somebody that's going to help you and give you some good advice and not take all your money.
Right on, Terry. Thank you very much. I have no more questions, but I really appreciate you answering all these questions and educating us on this. Where can we find you online?
Well, thank you very much for having the opportunity to talk. Hopefully I didn't go off on too many tangents and ramble, and it was informative. Yeah, online, I have an Instagram page. It's Terry_physio. Yeah, I'm not trying to sell anything there. I've just tried to post videos that are helpful to people. I haven't done too much over the summer, but there's a lot of stuff on there because I spent the last year doing several posts a week, I think. So it looks like when I checked last, there was a lot on there and a lot of basic information on mobility and stretching. So that's probably the simplest place is, Terry_physio. If you're in Ottawa, I'm at a clinic called Barhaven Health Hub, if there's anybody watching that's in Ottawa. But you can also, through Instagram, send me a direct message if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them because nobody ever contacts me anyway. So I get some views, but it's not very often people are reaching out. I get some thank yous every now and then too. So, if feel free if anybody has any questions about anything that I've said, feel free. You can direct message me through Instagram. It's probably the easiest place.
Awesome. Will do. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much for the chance to talk here today. You have a great day too.